billion per day. That's $35 billion borrowed per week to run our government, totaling over $1.5 trillion borrowed just to run the government for a year. Harvard's great economic historian, Niall Ferguson, noted the decline of a country can be clearly marked when we see it paying its moneylenders more than its army. His classic case comes from the French monarchy of the 1780s, who failed to make interest payments on their debt, causing a financial collapse that triggered their revolution. Recently, Carmen Reinhart and Kenneth Rogoff wrote a brilliant book entitled "This Time is Different: 8 Centuries of Financial Folly." Their vast study revealed that most government officials always believe that they are unique and different, and then make the same mistakes that have brought low past nations and empires. Well, using Niall Ferguson's tipping point, where are we today? This year, the total cost of maintaining our Army equals about $137 billion. This year, we will pay $225 billion in interest to our moneylenders for the use of $14 trillion borrowed from China, Japan, and elsewhere. The startling conclusion is the United States has already passed Ferguson's tipping point by paying America's moneylenders more than its own army. And it gets worse. In just 6 years, the administration says we will have to pay over $661 billion to our moneylenders for interest on rapidly expanding debts. With the expected cost of our Army at $195 billion, our Air Force at $201 billion, and our Navy Marines at $217 billion, the total cost of $613 billion to provide for our common defense will be smaller than the $661 billion due to our moneylenders. In simple economic terms, we will be forced to pay our moneylenders first before taking care of our own safety, or risk seeing the value of the very dollars in our wallets disappear. Now remember, the numbers that I have quoted here are optimistic. They assume no severe spike in interest costs and no additional war. Recently, the Senate agonized over a short-term, 2-week spending bill that made a $4 billion cut to spending. We should see that bill's cuts as modest, knowing that we will already pay $616 million daily in interest and over $4 billion in interest per week. In sum, the cuts made by the 2-week bill adopted by the Congress saved just 1 week's interest payment for the United States. As dire as the situation is, there could be a bright side. Our country has seen this movie before. Washington, Lincoln, Roosevelt, they all accumulated economy-crushing debts as the fate of the United States hung in the balance. Our best example of what to do next comes from our own grandparents, rightly entitled The Greatest Generation. Tom Brokaw coined the title for Americans of the 1930s and 40s who defeated the Depression, the Japanese, and the Nazis simultaneously. But I would add a fourth, largely unnoticed victory that Brokaw missed. After 3 great victories for freedom, our grandparents then spent the next 20 years paying the debts that they incurred to win the contest with the Depression and in the Pacific and in Europe. Their accumulated debts of 1946 totaled over 120% of our national income. Economists report that between economic growth and some inflation, the Greatest Generation reduced the crippling World War II debts that secured our victory during the late 1940s and decade of the 1950s. The return to a more fiscally responsible government sparked an economic boom that built a superpower called the United States of America. The history lesson here is clear. Each generation has faced conflict, war, and debt, and each generation is tested. The looming debt crisis facing this government is our generation's test. While some government officials and bankers may counsel ineffective actions, saying, "We owe this money to ourselves," or "Because the dollar is the reserve currency, we can owe this amount," we know that the crisis we face is not different from the ones that brought other nations low. With spending cuts and discipline, we can master this danger as our grandparents did. We need to do the hard things, like entitlement reform, and make similar moves in dramatic fashion the way our grandparents did to secure our future. But there is one difference that's truly there between us and other nations. From the dawn of our revolution, the United States has become the greatest force for human liberty and dignity ever known. The United States ended slavery, gave women the right to vote, and spread freedom across Europe, Latin America, and Asia. We are now challenged by a 21st century set of worldviews in the Middle East and China that do not hold the Western value of the individual as high as we do. Therefore, it is doubly important to do the work needed to reduce spending and balance the books so that we restore the vitality of a free people and their cause of expanding liberty and human dignity. So the next time you see a member of the greatest generation, don't just say thank you. Ask them for their advice on how to trim budgets and restore economic growth in the face of extraordinary debts the way they did. And, Mr. President, I yield back and would suggest